Hi and thanks for tuning in. In this week's video I want to show you 5 of my favourite gardening books and to give you some ideas to add to your own collection. Okay, so the first book I want to look at is this one by Christopher Lloyd, who developed the garden down at Great Dixter down in Sussex. Garden Flowers. It deals with perennials, bulbs, grasses and ferns. It's a beautiful book. It's alphabetical, and where the plants are listed it gives us anecdotes about how he used them in the garden, but also some advice on how to get the best from them, which is always really helpful. And the book is absolutely stuffed with the most beautiful images of how these plants are combined and used in the garden itself. And the very fact it is alphabetical I find really useful. It's not too heavy, doesn't go into masses of detail, but it's widely available, this book, and it's a really good place to start, even if you're a complete novice. And my second book is actually one of the first gardening books I ever bought at the ripe old age of 16. This is by Beth Chatto, and it's her seminal book really on creating a woodland garden. I love this book from the point of view that it actually makes the most of talking about shady areas and how in fact these can be very beautiful and dynamic spaces. They don't have to be problem areas, but also she charts the creating of this woodland garden from the outset. Early on in the book it actually shows you the photos where the garden is in its early stages. It's a blank canvas, and I always like a blank canvas story because it sort of talks about the problems and the challenges. So this is her best book, I would argue, but also she's done many others. So wherever you come across Beth Chatto, home in on it, try and get a copy, and this is great if you've got shade anywhere in the garden. Now, to be honest, most of the people I'm looking at in these books are gardening heroes, but this is another gardening hero. This is by Noel Kingsbury, and it's called The New Perennial Garden. This was a really profound book when it came out, and it looks at perennials in a very different way, certainly to how they had been in the past. And there's actually a movement called the New Perennial Movement, and it gets its name from this very book. It talks about using perennials in a way that prior to this book coming out hadn't really been thought about, and it's about doing things in a non-conventional way almost, and working with them in perhaps difficult spaces, but also working in a style that is perhaps more natural. It's a very good book for those of you who are starting to get interested in perennials themselves, hardy perennials, and how they evolve and work alongside one another. And whilst it's slightly more technical, it is worth it because it's an absolute insight into a very knowledgeable plantsman. Now, part of my work is designing gardens, and when you're designing gardens, even the best garden designers, I'm sure, are looking for ideas and inspiration. And this is one that I come back to time and time again. I look at this almost on a weekly basis. It's called The Garden Source, and it's by one of the most amazing garden photographers working today, a lady called Andrea Jones. And yes, it's a book of millions of very pretty pictures, but it's not just pretty pictures, because it's actually broken down into different categories, different areas, in a way that most books like this don't do. So it deals with sections such as steps, walls, small gardens, woodland areas, and it's not all on a grand scale. That's the other reason I particularly like this, because the reality is most of us don't have acres and acres and acres to garden. Sometimes it might be only a handful of square metres. The ideas are both looking at the landscaping, but at the planting, and as I say, there's so many different varied ideas, and it's collages of images which catalogue all the gardens that Andrea has been visiting for years now. There is in fact a revised edition of this now. I got this a few years ago, and it's one of the best books I ever bought. Okay, my last book, and hand on heart, this is my favourite book that I have in all the gardening books I have at home. This is called Planting a New Perspective, It's by, again, one of my heroes I've already mentioned, Noel Kingsbury, but working alongside him on this book is someone called Piet Oudolf, and I've spoken about him on several occasions, when particularly referring to ornamental grasses and perhaps prairie planting. This is quite a heavy book, I'm not going to lie to you. It's not to sort of flick through on a Sunday afternoon. This is in fact something that is, if you're starting to get into plants quite seriously, it takes the plants and it breaks them down into their characteristics, if you like. And if there's one thing that I really, really value about this book, is that all the research that has gone into it includes these amazing charts at the back which go through fantastic, reliable plants, but talks about, for example, their architectural qualities, their longevity, which not many books talk about, so that when you started to consider using these in a planting scheme, it just gives you so much information. And the other thing also is a very, very honest example of the designs that Piet Oudolf has been working on. In fact, it replicates them here. So there's no hiding or pretending that these aren't his designs or it's a snapshot. It's the full-blown picture, so you can really get an understanding into how his mind works, but also how that translates into the garden. Really, really terrific book, and as I say, it's one that I'm constantly looking for sort of inspiration and also ideas. That's Planting a New Perspective. But I think if I had to choose one of these books out of all 5 for the best one for you, I think it would be this one, the Christopher Lloyd book on garden flowers, especially if you're new to gardening, because it's a gentle introduction, but it has the humour with it as well, just to reassure you, if you like. So this would be my top choice. And in future videos, I'm going to be looking at more and more books as we go along.